Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. The talk this evening will be on the topic of the seven bojjhanga, the factors of awakening. In the Eightfold Noble Path, the sixth factor of the path is right effort, which is defined as fourfold: the effort to eliminate or diminish unwholesome states of mind that have arisen, the effort to prevent the arising of unwholesome states in the first place, the effort to arouse unarisen wholesome states, and the effort to maintain, nourish, and develop wholesome states that have already arisen. So, taking this formula, we should not only be on guard for falling into unwholesome states of mind, but we should also be on guard to notice and cultivate and cherish spiritually positive states that arise. And one of the primary categories of these are the seven bojjhanga. The word literally means factors of awakening, or you can make a poetic kind of translation and call it wings of awakening, because anga is also the wing of a bird. Boj comes from the root bodhi, which is wakefulness. And we talk about the Buddha's state as being sambodhi, perfectly awakened. So these are the seven factors that comprise the idea of being fully awake. There's seven of these factors, and they're given in two groups of three and one in the middle. The categorization of them is those factors which energize and invigorate the mind, and those which tranquilize and calm the mind. And the one in the middle is sati, which is mindfulness or recollectedness. So we'll begin with the factors that energize the mind. There are three of these, and they are virya, piti, and dhammavicaya. Virya is energy. It's related to that path factor I mentioned to begin with. The sixth path factor is samavayamo, right effort. And virya is a very close analog to that. Virya is energy. It's putting forth effort. It's rousing oneself. The Buddha said that the goal is for those who strive. It's not for the ones who do not make an effort. So rousing energy applies to meditation, but it also applies to everything we do in life. You need to rouse up the energy to get anything done. And the key factor for rousing energy is just to begin making the effort. The energy kind of feeds on itself. If you're putting in that effort, if you are energetic, if you make yourself force yourself against your laziness to be energetic, then that will become a habit and the mind will become more energized. I think it's a common experience that most people would notice that the hardest part of any task is just getting started, just rousing yourself to begin. There's a old saying, well begun is half done. And it's that initial rousing of energy is the spark that then feeds on itself and allows the mind to carry forward. The opposite state to energy is sloth and torpor, tinamida, is dullness, heaviness, sleepiness of mind. And oversleeping is one of the worst obstacles to rousing energy. It's good advice that when waking from sleep, one should wake quickly. Get out of bed and get going. That breaks that cycle of the mind sliding into sloth and dullness. The second factor is piti, which is generally translated as rapture or joy. It's one of the jhana factors. It's a mental factor that arises in the mind when samadhi deepens. Then this kind of joy or zest or enthusiasm comes forward. And it has a strong tendency to have a expression in the body as well. It's a mental factor that should be remembered, but it does have like a side effect or a result in the body that one can feel various sensations in the body in meditation, like tingling or spine rushes or sense of lightness. These are all manifestations of piti or effects of piti. The real piti is a mental factor. It's a joyfulness and brightness of the mind. So that's something that's useful and important to know and to bear in mind, that joy is an enlightenment factor. In the Abhidhamma, where mental states are categorized and cross-referenced, it's one of the interesting little details there is that when you take the feeling tone of mental states, of which there are 3 varieties, although there's a gradation, they can be strong or weak, but there's 3 categories: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Unpleasant states, like sadness or pain, are never associated with skillful mental formations or skillful states of consciousness. Neutral and joyful can be associated with various categories. They're not limited. Another point from the Abhidhamma is that joyful mental states act as a karma intensifier, meaning that if a person makes some good karma, an act of kindness or generosity, and does it wholeheartedly and with joy in the heart, then it's karmically more effective. It's still positive karma if you do it begrudgingly or just with a dull, neutral mind, but it's less meritorious. Likewise with negative states, if you do something to harm somebody, you do something cruel or selfish, and you make a bad karma, if you do that with glee, with joy. You take joy and pleasure in hurting someone. That's worse karma than if you do it just cold-heartedly, mechanically. So joy acts as a karma intensifier because the mind is more intense when joy is present. That's why it's an energizing factor. So remember that being joyful is spiritually positive. Being sad is not. The third energizing factor is Dhammavicaya, which is investigation of dhammas. A dhamma being any phenomena that arises in the mind, objects of consciousness. So this is almost a synonym for vipassana, or insight, that the mind with Dhammavicaya is taking an interest in the right way, with a yoniso manasikara, right reflection. And this is important to distinguish between yoniso manasikara and ayoniso manasikara. Manasikara means, literally it means doings of the mind. It means reflection or thinking about, contemplating. And it's either yoniso or ayoniso. Yoniso is positive and leading onwards, leading to liberation and awakening, and ayoniso is reflection or contemplation that binds you further to samsara. So when we say contemplating dhammas, it doesn't mean taking ownership of them. It doesn't mean identifying with them and creating a self-view around dhammas. It means seeing them truly in their own nature as they are, so seeing through them. Primarily it's seeing them in terms of the three characteristics, seeing their emptiness, their imperfection, and their impermanence. So objective seeing, objective clear seeing, Dhammavicaya. It's a principle of insight meditation that would apply very much here, is that nothing is so trivial it can be overlooked, and nothing is so important it needs to be clung to. Another way of understanding Dhammavicaya would be to say it's a kind of intelligent curiosity. Now this wakes the mind up, because you're taking an interest, you're curious. You know, what is this? What's happening? What's going on? You're not just with dullness allowing phenomena to pass by. You're taking an interest. You're looking with that sharp eye of insight. And that's really how we learn anything in the world. So those three factors, energy, joy, and investigation of dhammas, comprise the energizing factors. The other three factors are the calming or tranquilizing factors. And those are upekkha, passaddhi, and samadhi. Upekkha is equanimity. It's the state of non-reactiveness, that one takes in phenomena and occurrences, events, fully mindful but not reactive, not moved to either pleasure or pain, but just aware of the phenomena as it is, and the mind is stable and unmoved. So this we can see initially right away that this factor is different than piti, and it actually cannot arise in the same mind moment as piti. You're either going to be joyful or unhappy or equanimous. Equanimity is considered to be a higher mental state than joy. It's associated with the fourth jhana, and it's associated with the later stages of insight meditation. There are different qualities of upekkha, and the thing to avoid is not mistaking upekkha with dullness. In Thailand, they call that water buffalo equanimity. The equanimity of a water buffalo. It's a very stolid beast, but not because it's so spiritually advanced or wise, but just dull. It's just a big old cow, this water buffalo. And it's not what you are striving for. You're striving to be wide awake, but still equanimous. You're aware of what's occurring, but you're not moved by it. That's equanimity or upekkha. Passaddhi is tranquility. This is the calmness of mind, the deep, unruffled nature. Peacefulness, the mind that's at peace. So the opposite of passaddhi would be to fall into anxiety or fear. The mind, well established in passaddhi, is calm and imperturbable. It's not subject to anxiety or fear or suffering due to longing or any states like that. So calm, peacefulness, steadiness, stability. One of the factors that feeds passaddhi is contentment. Contentment with whatever one has, whatever one experiences. One is content, not striving or wishing for something else or something better. There's a line in one of the Mahayana texts about contentment. It says that contentment, or santuti is the Pali, I forget exactly what the Sanskrit is, but santuti is the wish-fulfilling gem. It's like in Indian stories and fables, fairy tales from India, the hero is always seeking the wish-fulfilling gem. It's when you have the wish-fulfilling gem, it grants you wishes. And contentment is the wish-fulfilling gem. It grants all your wishes, because if you're content, all you wish for is what you've already got. So all your wishes are fulfilled. The third factor is samadhi, and this is best understood as stability or stillness or unity of mind. Probably most of you have heard me talk about this before. The standard translation of samadhi as concentration, I think, is misleading. I don't think it's useful as a guide, because the mind in samadhi is not a narrow mind. As we concentrate things, we make them small, right? A mind with samadhi can be very expansive. It should be expansive and vast, but it's still. And in fact, this is the definition given in the Visuddhimagga and in the Abhidhamma of samadhi is non-wavering of mind, the non-wavering quality. So the mind that hasn't established samadhi flutters like a flag in the wind. It's constantly flitting from object to object. It's unstable. But samadhi is the stability, stillness. It's the gathering of the energies of the mind into one place, seated strongly on a single object. So this is developed with samatha meditations, like meditation on the breath or on a kasina object or a mantra. Any meditation that takes a deliberately chosen object and tries to fill the attention with that object develops primarily the power of samadhi. Samadhi, of course, is also a path factor. It's the eighth path factor. So it's something that's absolutely essential to develop for spiritual progress. So these are the three tranquilizing factors: equanimity, peacefulness, and stability of mind. And the one in the middle is sati, which is generally translated mindfulness, although that's another one that several of our monks are unhappy with that translation, and partly because it's been co-opted and is used in all sorts of ways now. People think they know what mindfulness is. The older books used to translate sati as recollectedness. And I think a simple way of expressing it would say remembering to be present. There is definitely a link to memory involved, because the Sanskrit cognate smrti is the Sanskrit word also for memory. So recollectedness, remembering to be present. And in the Pali texts, when some character in a story that's being praised as being mindful, satimant, having mindfulness, it's often said of him or her as a kind of defining characteristic. He is very mindful. He remembers well what was said and done long ago. And this is maybe confusing or misleading to a lot of people, because the idea is also very commonly expressed, and there's some validity to it, to say mindfulness is being in the present moment. And that's very true. But being in the present moment means remembering to be there. If you're mindful, you are fully aware of circumstances. The object is very clear to you. And if you are mindful in the present moment, then you remember things. There's definitely a link, a connection there. In the Abhidhamma, the categorization of the states of consciousness the mind goes through in cognizing an object, one of the last stages is called tadarmana, which is registration. It means putting it away. It's like filing something in the hard disk, making a backup. And if the consciousness is not fully mindful, it doesn't reach the stage of tadarmana, and the object is not committed to memory. So a small way of demonstrating this is, if you find yourself always misplacing your keys or your pen or whatever, the reason is because when you put them down, you weren't being mindful. If you make a point of being mindful as you put something down, then you don't have to make an effort to remember where it is. When you go to look for it, it'll come back right away, because it's been registered. It's reached the stage of tadarmana. And that only happens with mindfulness, with sati. there's a story about a Zen master who used to test the mindfulness of his pupils when they came to see him by asking them, which side of the door did you leave your sandals on? And if they couldn't remember or had to make a guess, then obviously they weren't very mindful. They just flopped their sandals off and walked in. But if they're mindful, they'll know which side of the door they put their sandals on. Sati is being present. It's remembering to be present. There's a story from Uspensky, who was a disciple of Gurdjieff. Who, if does everybody know who Gurdjieff was? He was a 19th century. I think he was Georgian. He was, a Russian Georgian Sufi master, and he became kind of famous and even notorious, and was kind of wild, charismatic personality. And Uspensky was his principal student, who was much more sober-minded and sedate and intellectually minded, and he wrote a number of books. And I remember I read some of Uspensky, and I quite like his style. And there's one incident he's talking about in his book. An exercise of Gurdjieff's was to try and always, when you're going about your business, to always remember that you're present in the scene. And often, if you're not paying attention, you're aware through your eyes and ears of everybody else and of the street and the situation, but you kind of forget that you're part of the scene. You're present because you don't see yourself, right? So, as part of the exercise, Gurdjieff's method was to always keep mindful of the fact that you're there, you're present, which is definitely an exercise of sati. It's remembering to be present. And Ouspensky says he was walking down the street in Copenhagen practicing this, and he felt very alert and awake and alive. And as he was going down the street, was carrying out just his normal daily business, he passed a tobacconist. And he thought he'd go in and buy some pipe tobacco. And he went inside the shop, and he was looking at and smelling the samples of tobacco, and he got lost in the sensuality of it, and he forgot himself as being present. And he still carried out his business. He bought some tobacco, and he went somewhere else, maybe a newsstand or whatever, and it was like an hour later, he's walking down another street, and he suddenly remembered to do the exercise again. And he says that period in between was like a dream. It didn't seem real. He wasn't really fully present. So that's not a particularly Buddhist way of expressing it or stating it, but it is an expression of sati, of remembering to be present. And when you remember to be present, you're fully there, you're on, everything is real. And when you don't have sati, it's like a dull dream. You're not really present. You're not really engaged. You're not really awake. Now, these 7 factors, they relate to each other, and sati has the key role of being aware of which factors are present. And this is one of the key ways of balancing the mind. There are other teachings like the 5 faculties that also bear on this point. This is an essential part of practice, is learning to find this balance point. And the Buddha gives the analogy of trying to keep a fire going at a nice steady fire, like say you're making a fire for cooking. And You want just a nice steady fire. If it starts to blaze too hot and get out of control, then you don't pick up a bunch of dry twigs and straw and throw it in the fire. You damp it down with green boughs and some fresh grass. But if the fire is starting to go out, it's getting very weak, you don't throw the green grass and the green wood on it. You look for dry kindling, bits of bark, whatever that'll get the fire energized. Right? So the enlightenment factors are like this. You're trying to keep the mind in a steady state. And if you are overdeveloped on one side or the other, then things are not going to progress smoothly. You can notice that in your meditation, that if it's not going well, if you're having difficulties at times, it's going to be, I mean, there's many kind of particulars, but there's two general categories. You could be sliding into dullness, getting sleepy and dull and not energized, or you could be becoming restless, agitated, twitchy, mind running all over the place, the body unable to stay still. You know, and those are symptomatic of having either too much tranquility or too much energy. They're out of balance. You have to bring them up together. I think a good modern analogy is like changing a tire. You tighten down the lug nuts evenly. Do a little bit of one, then you go to another one and do that one. You don't tighten one down all the way. You're just going to bend the hub and make a mess of it. So you bring them up in tandem, and you mindfulness in the middle. You can never have too much mindfulness. That's always useful. And that keeps an awareness of how the other factors are doing. So if you're mindful, you'll be aware, oh, right now I'm too energized. I'm becoming restless. I have to work on the tranquility factors. Or I'm becoming too dull and sleepy. I need to work on the energizing factors. Don't make the mistake of doubling down. For example, a common error is if you're very dull, if you're sliding into dark, oppressive, dull states of mind, don't try and intensify your samadhi at that time. That's not going to help. It's going to make it worse. And the samadhi is not going to be, true samadhi. It's going to be miccha samadhi or wrong samadhi, kind of like a hypnosis. What you need to do then is to energize the energetic factors. So effort. If you're dull, you make sure you make an effort, for example, on the posture. You make sure you're sitting straight and alert. And you can do more walking meditation because that's more energetic. If you're very dull, you can break it by doing some more vigorous kind of exercise. Cultivate piti. You can take up meditation that increases the feeling of joyfulness, such as contemplation of the Buddha, chanting, metta meditation, and to bring up that joyful energy, that zest, and investigation of dhammas, stay alert, be alert and pay attention to what's happening. If you're feeling bored, investigate boredom as a mental state. And oppositely, if you're restless, there's a mistake made with people who get restless in meditation is they think, I'm not making progress in my meditation right now. I should do something else. Maybe I'll get down to it a little bit later. And then get up and, do something else or go for a walk or whatever. You never subdue restlessness by giving into it. The key to getting through restlessness is to force yourself to be still, physically and mentally still. And that can be very difficult if restlessness is arising in the mind, but that's the way to subdue restlessness. You can't appease it. That just increases it in the longer term. So you develop those qualities of equanimity, non-reactiveness, not being upset. In the example where you're feeling very restless and the mind is running all over the place, just be equanimous about that. That's the way the mind is right now. I don't have to feel bad about it. It's just that's what it is. And encourage peacefulness or tranquility by not letting yourself become upset by minor setbacks or misadventures. Just stay peaceful, internally peaceful. And samadhi, you want to turn that energy into singleness, bring the mind into a singularity. Try to make the effort to keep the mind still on a single object, this mental stillness. And a good way to think of that is, don't think in terms of pushing the mind onto the object. Think of opening the mind and letting the object fill the mind. So the mind is still. The mind's not going out poking the object. It's accepting. It's receptive. It's open, and the object, like the breath, fills the mind. You let the object in. You let it fill the consciousness, and everything else that might arise, you to pay it no attention. You let it fade away into the background. So these 7 enlightenment factors are something that's very central to the Buddhist teaching. He actually talked about it a fair bit. And incidentally, one of the Paritta chants on the 7 Bojjhangas is traditionally considered to be the healing chant. If you or someone else is suffering from illness, then that's the chant that's done. And that's based on the story of Moggallana became ill with some stomach disease or complaint, and the Buddha told him to contemplate the 7 enlightenment factors. And doing so, he became cured and well. And it makes sense in that this is a teaching about balance and harmony and getting all the factors in harmony, working together, and kind of opposite energies helping each other, and everything's balanced, which could be said to be a definition of good health, when everything in the system is in balance and working together in harmony. I'll stop there.
Sadhu, sadhu.